Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining Monday, April 21st, year 2025, year of our Lord. Tonight, I want to go over Trump's mythical numbers regarding gas prices. Also, Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, probably said one of the most asinine things ever in history for that position. Also, gold prices going through the roof. All that plus the bonus show later.
In a world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act.
Okay, so anyway, I wanted to go over, my trip going from East Coast to West Coast, and I went over from South Carolina. It was just a few miles actually outside of Lake Tahoe, all the way to Reno, Nevada. Drove all the way there, all the way back within the 2-week span. And look, I went through red states, blue states, all the states in between, and I can tell you there was no place with $1.80 for gas, right? That was just complete bullshit that Trump just kind of threw out there. Now with that said, I seen some places that boomed, and I seen some places that bust. Now, regarding, Vegas, you have, like I was saying earlier, literally the ultra wealthy literally stepping over the ultra poor. And I have never seen so much homelessness in my life as I did in Vegas. I mean, it was really sad. And, look, after being there, as long as I was, I can understand why there's so much homelessness in Vegas. Because, when you pay $52 for pizza and a soda, right, things start to break, right? Things start to get too expensive. And for a lot of people, it is too expensive. And so, it was just, the Vegas that I remember, the last time I was there about 8 or 10 years ago, that Vegas is gone. The buffets, you used to get a nice buffet, you used to have the showgirls, all that's been blown out. All the attractions in front of the casinos. They used to have the, like the pirates and all that. That's all been blown out. But I got to see a lot of really cool people. I got to see my mother, my aunt, my son in Texas. I got to see my buddy Dennis and his wife. And so I got to see a lot of really cool people. And I had a really good time traveling the country. It's funny because my Facebook I was in Winslow, Arizona. It's funny because I went to go see the Eagles, and one of their songs has Winslow, Arizona in the song, Take It Easy. And so I was playing that with the American flag playing, and of course Facebook, shit-canned that episode. But because I was playing the music. But so anyway, I want to thank everybody for reaching out to me and wishing me safe travels. I've been dying to get back into this seat. I mean, there's just so much complete nonsense going on. Just so much intellectual dishonesty taking place. And so my first story is going to be the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who talked about, and he might have said one of the most asinine things I've ever heard in my life, saying that China has a real unbalance, and their problem is they make too much stuff, right? That their economy is so weak, like we're holding all the cards, right? Because we get to buy the stuff that they make, right? And according to Scott Bessent, because China produces so much stuff, they're actually the weaker country, right? So Let me explain just kind of quickly how ridiculous that is. Let's say you're growing food, right? You have two countries, right? And you have a country that produces too much food, right? Well, what's going to happen? The worst thing that can happen is, right, food ends up rotting, right? You're going to have some rot because they can't eat it all, right? They have so much food, right? They can't eat it all, right? What happens to a country that doesn't make enough food, right? Like Somalia, right? Those people starve to death, right? So in that scenario, which is the stronger country, right? Obviously, the stronger country is the one that produces the most stuff, right? For some reason, Scott Bessent doesn't understand basic economics. And, I always found the term treasury kind of funny because, back when we first started this country, we had an actual treasury that held treasure, right? It had gold, it had silver in it, right? Today, it's nothing but a bunch of paper, right? IOUs, right? And so, Scott Bessent, all of these guys that you see in the Trump administration, they are literally falling on their swords, literally, destroying the economy, right? Because they don't understand trade, they don't understand monetary policy, they don't even understand fiscal policy, right? These were people who were willing to blow Trump's boots the hardest, right? And that's how they got the job, right? And this is proof that you could be a billionaire, right? And still not know what the fuck you're talking about when it comes to economics, right? Now, Trump literally live on TV the other day made up out of thin air. I don't even know where he gets these numbers. I think he just said it because he knows the MAGA faithful will just follow whatever the fuck he says. Trump literally said that gas prices in several states are $1.90 per gallon, which is complete bullshit, right? It's complete BS, right? Now, I am lucky that I've traveled from coast to coast, basically, right? During this time, right? That Trump made this preposterous statement. And I can tell you, okay, there was nowhere even close to $1.90 for gas, right? As a matter of fact, there were only two states that had the lowest gas during my travels. And it's funny because I traveled through those states and got gas in those states, which is Tennessee and Mississippi, right? Which was $2.70 a gallon, right? The average in gas per gallon is $3.17 per gallon. And let me tell you something. There were places I paid upwards of almost $4 per gallon, okay? I never paid under $2.70 per gallon going across the country, all right? So this BS about, yes, per barrel has gone down, right? Not because we've become all of a sudden more productive in oil or because, we're creating all this energy now. No, the reason why per barrel is going down, okay, is because they fear, the oil industries around the world are fearing a global recession now because of what Trump did. So what's happening is the price per barrel is going down, okay? But you're saying to yourself, well, wait a minute. If the price per barrel is going down, why aren't gas prices? Why? The same reason why gas prices didn't go down in the 70s. Because the dollar is getting clobbered. The dollar has been getting clobbered day after day after day after day. Usually, when bonds are getting clobbered, people rush into the dollar as a safe haven. That's not what's happening. Foreigners and people around the world are dumping the treasuries, dumping dollars, right? And they're buying gold, right? They're buying real assets, right? They're buying other foreign assets, right? Assets that I'm invested in. And so, And worse is all the fake memes that are going around. Right now you're starting to see fake memes popping up on gas prices. And, and this is the thing. Like, the only way you could be truly fooled about gas prices is if you yourself don't drive. Right? If you're just like a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, right? You don't ever leave the house. Like my grandmother never drove, right? So maybe you could, fool her, right? Because she never drove, right? She'd take the subway, right? But I'm sure even on the subway you look out, oh, okay, there's some gas prices, right? Like she's not blind, right? She wasn't blind. And so, it's sort of ridiculous, right? That Trump had put this out there. But why does he put this out there? Because people just tend to follow whatever this guy says, right? If you're his ultra fan, right, you just believe it, right? Just like, with Pete Hegseth, right? Pete Hegseth literally, just got caught again, on his cell phone, on a open server, okay, giving information to his brother, his mother, his sister. I guess, he wants to, prove, oh, look, I'm, really cool now, and, I have all this information, but, when I was in the services, or if you were in the services, if you even left a piece of paper out, right, that had information on it about war plans or plans in general, right, your ass would have been grass, right? This is now the second time with him. And so I made a post. And, it's like nobody will touch it, right? Or if they do, just write fake news. Well, based on what? Why do you say it's fake news? Why? Because Pete Hegseth says it's fake, right? Now, this is what happens, right, when you install people who aren't fit for the job and are just ass kissers, right? Because that's all, hey, Amy, how you doing? That's all Pete Hegseth is. He's a big, giant ass kisser to Trump. That's all he is, right? And so if you're part of the MAGA faithful, right, you're just going to believe whatever this drunk tells you. He's a drunk, right? He's also a molester of women, right? Already proven, right? And so, it's high time that people start calling these people out, right? And so I thought what Scott Bessent had said, the Treasury Secretary, talking about China holding all the cards, well, that's complete BS. Now, here's the thing. I want to explain how trade usually works, right? Usually, you have all these countries, right? So imagine a big pot, right? And every country puts into the pot, okay? Now, the United States, okay, we put a little bit in the pot, right? But yet, we take out $1 trillion more than we produce out of the pot. That $1 trillion worth of stuff, right, that the rest of the world doesn't get to use, right? See, the rest of the world, they have to actually do the work, right? They had to invest in the plans, train the people, ship the stuff, right? And so what happens is when we take out of the pot the extra $1 trillion, right, worth of stuff every year, this isn't over 10 years, this is per year, right? What happens is that's $1 trillion worth of stuff that the rest of the world is not getting to use. So now, how is this possible? How is it that the United States is able to take $1 trillion out more than we produce, right? Because this is the question that nobody is answering. I'm going to answer it tonight. The reason why we are able to take $1 trillion out more than we normally, than normal countries could, for one, we have the reserve currency, right? So, it's the reserve currency that has been propping up our economy, okay? And because of that, we artificially set rates in this country, right? We have a phony debt ceiling that both parties keep blowing up every year, multiple times a year now, right? And so when we increase the debt limit, right? So right now, Trump wants a big, beautiful bill that's going to add $5.5 trillion to the deficit, right? So you ask yourself, well, where are we going to get the money, right? Well, some of it we're going to monetize, right? We're going to print up a bunch of money, right? To service some of the debt, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to go to the people that J.D. Vance called peons, right? And losers and suckers, right? That's what J.D. Vance said. We're going to ask to borrow more money, right? From these other countries, okay? So we're going to borrow more money from them. This is the plan, right? And then we're going to take that filtered money that now we have that gives us extra purchasing power to spend, right, that we shouldn't have, and we're going to buy the stuff that they make. So we call that in business vendor financing, okay? But we're doing it on a global scale, right? So we borrow money, and then we take the money that we have, we give them dollars for their stuff, right? Now, here's the thing. The value is not in the dollars. See, we have convinced the rest of the world to accept our dollars, right? Why? Why are our dollars so special? Well, I can tell you, back over 100 years ago, they were very special. Back when we were backed by gold, right? We used to make silver certificates, right? Back when our coins had real silver, right? Real copper in them, right? Real nickel, right? Now, they've been debased. So, now you have other countries that are making real goods, right? They're making our electronics, right? They're making car parts. They're sending us avocados and bananas and coffee, right? And what do we give them in return, right? We give them a bunch of paper, right? And so I want you to look at it like this. So when you receive your check, whether it's a Social Security check, whether it's a check from work, right? What I try to tell people is you don't really care about the paper, right? You only care about what you can get with the paper, right? So the paper does you no good, right? You can't sit there and look at it on the wall, right? Or, stare at it in your bank account because it does no good if you can't buy nothing with it, right? So for so long, right, we've been trading our paper, right, for their stuff. Like, let's say China, right? So we've been trading our paper for their stuff. Now, why does China take our paper? Well, because they can buy real estate, right? They can buy our assets in the stock market, right? They can sell us other stuff and invest in more plants and more, more prosperous things, right? Well, according to people like Scott Bessent and Trump, we're the ones being ripped off, right? No, they've got that backwards. We are ripping them off, right? Because at the end of the day, we get the stuff, right? They're stuck with the paper. If we say to China, hey, you can no longer sell us stuff, you can no longer buy our real estate, you can no longer buy our companies on the stock market, right? Then what good is our paper, right? Now, China has about $700 billion worth of our treasuries, right? So a lot of people say, well, why would they sell the treasuries? They'd just be shooting themselves in the foot. No, they would be liberating themselves, right, out from under us. See, the easy part, and this is the part that, again, Trump doesn't understand, Scott Bessent doesn't understand, all of the neocons in the Trump administration don't understand, is that there's no skill in actually buying stuff, right? Any moron can go to the store and purchase stuff, right? The real skill is to actually make stuff, right? Now let's go back to that basket of $1 trillion dollars worth of stuff that we take out that the rest of the world misses out on. What happens when we no longer are able to grab in that pot? what do you think happens? Well, what happens is other countries say, hey, you know what? We're not going to buy your treasuries anymore, right? Bonds, that's why bonds are going ballistic, right? Because that's why gold is going ballistic, right? Because foreigners are divesting from the United States, right? And I've made this play. I've been making this financial play now going on 15 years, 20 years, right? Where I've been investing in emerging markets, European markets, right? Because I always thought that foreigners would catch on to just how stupid they were to keep vendor financing us, to keep, taking our dollars and trading them for their work, labor, and stuff, right? Their productive capacity, right? Well, I never thought that we would be dumb enough to shoot ourselves in the foot, right? And do it ourselves, right? And so what's going to happen is, right, so let's take Nike, right? So you don't think people in China don't want to wear Nikes? You don't think people in Japan or Brazil, right, want to wear Nikes, right? Or maybe you don't think that they want a luxury handbag, right? Or how about a dishwasher, right? So, a lot of dishwashers are made in, let's say, Korea, Japan, China, right? All the parts and everything, right? Now, the people who work in these factories, right, they tend to not be able to afford a dishwasher, right? And what does Scott Bessent think that these people say to themselves? Like, oh man, how stupid of these Americans to use a dishwasher when they can use their own hands, right? Same thing with washing machines, right? So a lot of washing machines and parts come from overseas, right? And they come from factories where people cannot afford a washing machine, right? Well, right now, why is that? That's because, we've been able to outbid China, Japan, Brazil, right? The Swedes, right? With the dollar, right? We've been able to outbid them. Well, now that the dollar is getting clobbered, right? We're no longer able to outbid them. So what happens is other countries now can bid on those goods, right? See, this is the part that MAGA does not get, or Trump does not get, or the MAGA faithful do not understand, right? Because you don't think the people in China wouldn't want to use a dishwasher, right? Or use a washing machine, or walk around in Nikes, right? See, all the factory has to do, like let's say they make Nikes for the United States, and we probably have, a lot of size, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, right? Because we're bigger people, right? Now, in China, they probably have a lot of, I'm going to guess, because they're pretty small people, a lot of 5s, 6s, and 7s, right? Size shoes, right? All they got to do is just adjust the sizes. That's in the factory, right? Where we would have to create the whole supply. First, we have to save the money. That's first. Well, America's in debt, right? Where are we going to get the money, right? We're already $36 trillion in debt. And with what Trump is doing, going to blow another $5.5 trillion, not one penny is going to reindustrialize the United States. Not one penny of that, right? And also you have to think about debt as a stimulant, right? So we've also, we're lucky for the past 10 to 15 years with near 0% interest rates. And yet, with 0% interest rates for almost 15 years, right, it did not bring back manufacturing. What it brought back was debt, right? What it brought back was credit card debt, house debt, school debt, college debt. It brought back auto debt, right? It blew up massive bubbles in the stock market. Massive bubbles, right? All over the place, right? So all of our assets are way overpriced, right? Compared to the rest of the world, right? So we've been living very large off of this system. And now what we've told the rest of the world is, hey, we don't trust you. You guys are a bunch of thieves. We don't need you anymore. You need us. So we have pricked our own bubble, right? That's what we've done. Not me. MAGA and Trump has pricked our economic bubble, right? He stuck a fist through it. full of razors and nails, right? And so now, and so now the rest of the world that has been missing out on buying this stuff now, because if you look like at the Swiss franc, right? If you look at the yuan or the yen, right? They're beating the dollar, right? As far as purchasing power goes, right? That's what happened. So now they're going to be able to buy the stuff that we used to. That's how this works. The world, they do not need us as a customer. Yes, there are going to be things that are going to come through that we're still going to get, right? But for most of the economy, this is a reset. And the reset is going to be just like every other country in the world. If you don't produce it, you're not going to have it unless you trade with something else, right? So, before, when Mexico would send a bunch of avocados, right? And maybe Colombia would send a bunch of coffee, right? And we'd send them a couple of apples and a bunch of paper, right? Those days are gone, right? They're going to want real stuff, right? They're not going to want paper, right? And right now, you got to look at gold because gold is really the canary in the monetary coal mine, and yet the Fed and the financial media don't see the canary is screaming bloody murder for the Fed to stop with their loose monetary policies. Now, what Trump is trying to do, and look, Jerome Powell needs to go, but not because of what Trump is saying, right? Powell needs to go because he's not tight enough with his policies, right? He didn't protect the dollar, right? What Trump wants to do is drop rates back to zero, right? And he just wants to inflate more asset bubbles, right? Because, look, when you inflate the bubbles and you're in a bubble, right, you think everything is great. However, you're losing purchasing power. So maybe your stock goes up $40, right? But you lost $70 in purchasing power, right? People don't realize that till it's too late. So now gold has had 2 days over the past week where it's risen over $100 in just one day. Now these are massive moves for this market. When I did my last show on April 4th, gold had just cracked $3,000. It was actually at $3,014, which was at an all-time high. Okay? Now, well, since I made my round trip from South Carolina to Vegas and Reno, and then to Texas, gold today closed around $3,433 per ounce. Okay? Gold is telling the Fed to tighten monetary policies and telling the federal government to stop spending. They need to not pass this bill. We cannot afford it. Again, nobody is going to be for less government and low taxes more than me. However, you need to pay for government, right? And as we've seen with the last Trump tax cuts, look what they've done to the economy, right? They did not pay for themselves. Yes, the tax receipts went up, but government went up even more, right? The cost of government went up even more. So it does not pay for itself, right? And so then you say, well, we had COVID, we had all this stuff. And what do you think? If we pass this budget, this bill, right, with more tax cuts, you don't think we're not going to have more disasters in the next decade? I mean, there's not been a decade in my life without a dot-com bubble bust, an '08 financial crisis, COVID, multiple hurricanes, right? I mean, we've had everything from monkeypox to we've had all sorts of things. The Iraq-Afghanistan wars. Now we have Gaza, Ukraine, right? I mean, it's asinine to believe that these tax cuts would ever pay for themselves, because they won't, So my question is, because, Trump had his Liberation Day, I think it was like a day or two before I went on vacation, or it was a day before, it was somewhere in there. And so, since Liberation Day, according to Trump, how does it feel to be liberated from your 401ks, purchasing power, and investments? And soon, we will all be liberated from consuming the products that the rest of the world has been subsidizing on our behalf. As the dollar continues to get clobbered, this will allow foreigners now to begin to enjoy the fruits of their own labor. Don't worry, because the Chinese, Japanese, Swedish, and Saudis and Brazilian their feet, will love wearing Nikes. The Nikes that no longer will be coming into our shores, because now we've been outbid, right? We have outbidded ourselves, and now they're going to outbid us. Don't you feel liberated being forced to wear an old pair of shoes? I mean, the companies that I see coming back to the United States, TV repairman, I see shoe repairman coming back. So yeah, there will be industries created as a result of this asinine policies, but they're not good, right? They're going to be fixing soles on your shoes because you're not going to be able to afford a pair of shoes, right? Only the very wealthy will be able to afford them, right? Because think about it. I buy Jordans, okay? My Jordans, on average, cost anywhere from $200, $180, $200, $220 per pair, right? And that's a pretty average price for a pair of Jordans, right? Well, when Trump slaps, let's say 140% tariff, on shoes, right? I mean, so what do you think I'm going to pay? You think I'm going to pay $400, $500, $600 for a pair of shoes? Of course not, right? So what'll happen is I'll just wear my shoes a lot more. I'm going to have to, maybe I don't buy another pair for a long time, or maybe I just don't. Maybe, like I said, other cheaper, brands come through, brands I would never buy, right? Garbage stuff, right? That don't last as long, right? Why do I buy Jordans, right? First, I like the brand, right? I like walking in them, right? I like to walk. I'm a very active guy, right? They feel good on my feet, right? And here's the thing. It's my money. I should be able to buy whatever the fuck I want with my money. I'm sorry, right? And so the fact that there are people out there that want to restrict me from doing business with outside countries, right? It's voluntary. Nobody's forcing me, right? Now, sometimes I buy Adidas, right? I like old school Adidas, right? With the three stripes, right? Now, why shouldn't I be able to buy a pair of Adidas? Why? I mean, it's sort of ridiculous, right? So I've been telling people who's online, saying things like, only buy American, blah, 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 fucking bullshit. Listen, if you really believe that, get off the internet, right? Throw away your cell phone. Throw away all your electronics. You know why? Because all of that shit comes from overseas. All of it, right? So, don't be a hypocrite. Right? Look, if you want to live in the Stone Ages and not trade with anybody, right? And live like you're in Cuba or live like you're in North Korea, go right ahead. Nobody's stopping you. But you know what's funny? I don't see anybody throwing away their iPhone or throwing away their computers or throwing away their tablets or leaving the internet. None of them. Nobody's done it yet, right? And so it's an asinine argument to sit there preaching to people about, only buy American. Trust me, I can go in anyone's closet right now. I promise you. You have stuff from Italy, France, Asia, okay? You have stuff from all over the world, right? And so, why did you buy that stuff, right? You bought that stuff because you made the conscious decision for yourself, right? What was best for you? Look, it was funny. I was at the hotel and in the Rio in Vegas, and I like to get extra towels, right? I go through a lot of towels when I'm at the hotel, and I understand, look, there are some conservationists out there like, oh, don't use so many towels, but I tell the maid, I'm like, listen, I treat myself like a Ferrari, right? I mean, I like to take care of myself, right? Go to the gym, go for a walk, right? I try to eat right? Drink water, okay? Those are my choices. And not everybody has those same choices, okay? But I should be allowed to make those choices, okay? The same way you should be allowed to make those choices, right? And so maybe you'll pay more, right? To have a better quality thing, right? Like I know there's a lot of good clothing and purses and stuff that comes from Italy, right? Like watches that come from Sweden, right? Some of the best watches in the world come from Europe, right? Should you not be allowed to buy a watch from Sweden? Why? Right? Why should you be punished for that? Right? Do you think the watch business is coming back to the United States? Right? And if it did, would it be anywhere near the quality of the watches that I own? No. Now, I don't wear watches, but I own watches, right? Sometimes if I want to go out for a fancy dinner, I might put on a watch. I might put on a regular, wristband thing, right? I generally don't wear watches. But when I do, I like a nice watch, right? Just like I like nice gold, right? Or other things, right? Nice glasses or whatever else, right? Why shouldn't I be able to buy a pair of Ray-Bans, right? That's ridiculous. Now, if there was an American company that could make a pair of Ray-Bans that were comparable to the price and quality, maybe I'll give them a shot. But right now, that's not what you have, right? And so, as a libertarian, I reject protectionist values. I reject when the government says, hey, you can't eat that, or you can't consume that, right? Or you can't buy that, right? Like, I was talking to my mother in Reno, and, they were talking about how, if you're on SNAP benefits, you now can't get junk food, right? You can't buy soda, you can't buy snacks. Apparently, for some odd reason, Republicans, and I don't know when this happened, because back when Reagan was around in Bush, I never heard this stuff. All of a sudden now, we have a lot of people preaching to other people how to live, right? They want to control other people. Now, okay. Should snacks and soda be only for the wealthy? Is that what you guys really think? Imagine if you're a single mother, right? You have a kid. And, daddy died or daddy's gone or whatever the situation is, right? But you're getting SNAP benefits. And you're not cheating the system. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe you just got fired by Doge. Maybe you got fired by Tesla, right? Maybe you got fired by Facebook, right? Meta. And you have to go on SNAP. And now, your kid knows what happened, right? They're not dumb. But like the age of 4 or 5, they know when things go bad in the house, okay? And maybe having a little snack after school, might make the kid feel a little better. Okay? That's all the kid has, right? Daddy's gone, the job is gone, people die, things happen, and you're worried about whether or not a fucking little kid on welfare has soda? This is what we're worried about? Are you fucking kidding me? Right? Like, mind your fucking business. If you don't want to give the money, then don't give it. Right? But stop trying to control people. Right? See, that's the part that I reject. See, the Republican Party, they used to stand for individual freedom, right? They always preach, able to choose, right, what you want to do, but unless it's something they don't want you to do, right? They're always telling you what to do with your body, what you can smoke, who you can have sex with, who you can marry, right? They're always telling you, now they're telling you what you can eat, right? And now that Robert Kennedy is in there, now they're talking about banning. And again, look, I like I said, I treat my body like a Ferrari. Now, it doesn't mean, I won't go out and have Mexican food, or I won't have, a treat, right? I like to treat myself too. I'm not a monk, right? But that's my choice, right? And just like you have your choices, right? But I don't want government coming in and giving me gray Fruit Loops, right? I don't want government coming in and telling, some little kid, no, you can't have those animal crackers. Sorry, kid, they're not on the list. They're for wealthy people, right? I mean, I grew up very poor. Okay, I was poor, but we didn't know it. One of those situations. And now, mind you, back then things were completely different. I remember when the church, the Catholic Church, came to my house, okay, and knocked on my door. My grandmother answered the door, and they were, what is that? No. They were nuns, and they wanted to give my grandmother food. And my grandmother says, "Hey, I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're doing, but no, I'm not going to take that. You go give that. I will help you to go deliver that to other people. We have enough, right? Because back then people had more pride than they have today, right? So we have that aspect, right? Society is different, right? Now, with that said, as we were poor, I still could have a Coca-Cola, right? I mean, I could still have, if we had a bag of chips. I mean, we didn't really have chips, but, we had Jell-O, right? That's got food coloring in it, right? I could have Jell-O, right? That was the big thing that we had growing up was Jell-O. Because it was cheap. You could make a bunch of them, put them in the fridge, and they'd last all week, right? That was my snack, right? And, I couldn't imagine what it would be like in my situation. I had no parents back then, right? Growing up in my grandparents' house, then my uncle's, and not being able to have, able to eat this stuff, right? As a kid, right? It was the thing that, lit my day up. I looked forward to it, right? Because life was tough, right? And so, I think there's a lot of preaching going on from a lot of people. I think they mean well, but on the same token, get out of other people's business. But when it comes to what they eat, who they're having sex with, who they want to marry, right? Just as much as I don't want gay people and transsexuals to tell me what to do, right? And how to approach them or how to treat them, right? I will treat people based on how, they treat others, right? If you treat me like a POS, I'm going to treat you back. What you give me is what you get, right? But I'm generally a nice person, right? So I usually start off as a nice person. I don't care what you are, right? I don't care what you do behind closed doors, right? As long as you're not infringing on the rights of others, it's fine by me, right? It's none of my business, right? But this idea that people think that they're holier than thou, I'm a better person because I, kick these welfare people off of, drinking a soda. Seriously? That's the argument you're going to make? Right? Now, where is the retraining of these people, right? See, that's the thing that we're not talking about, right? How do we fix the poverty in this country? That's what we're not talking about. And so we're focused on sodas and snacks and, telling the rest of the world that they've screwed us, right? When we've really screwed them, right? We're not really focusing in on, and this is the problem with Trump, right? We're not focusing in on what the real problem is, right? The real issue that we have, right? First off, is runaway government. And it's funny because I sat down with one of my really good Democrat friends, and he'll tell you all day. And as a matter of fact, all my Democrat friends, any Democrat friend that I have, will be the first one to say they want to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. They'll be the first ones to say it. And as a matter of fact, the Doge, there's another Doge wing in the Congress. There's Democrats on there. You never hear from any of the ones in Congress. Why? Because they've been totally shut out by Elon and, these kids, like the one kid's name, he's a criminal who stole information on the internet named Big Balls. Go look him up. These people weren't vetted or anything. God forbid if you went through Congress, right, and we had real debates, right? I see a lot of Facebook stuff out there. Well, when Bill Clinton fired people, right, nobody was outraged. That's because he went through Congress, right? That's because he got Republicans and Democrats on board and made a deal, right? And there was an exit ramp for these people, right? It wasn't just a firing, right? They were given notices, right? They had a way to get off the ramp, right? It was done way more humanely than this, right? Than haphazardly firing people. You don't even know who they are, right? Some of these people are good people. Some of these people, like, work in a nuclear facility, right? They work in really important jobs, and and we just fired him blindly. And they were like, oh man, maybe we should try and get some of these people back. They don't even know who they are. I own a business, right? I have a ton of people who work for me, right? I've never just blanket fired somebody. First off, I hate firing people. But when I have to do it, you better believe it is for just cause, right? And thank God I haven't had to do that in a very long time, right? The people I have has been there for years. I know who they are, right? And that's the difference between what Bill Clinton did, right, and what Trump is doing, right? He went through Congress, okay? And he didn't just create a fake department out of nowhere, right? That's a big difference to me, who, by the way, loves the Constitution. And let me tell you, over the past month, I've had several MAGA Republicans tell me, stop talking about the Constitution. Could you imagine telling me, Bobby, you talk about the Constitution so much, you should stop. Why? Because now it's inconvenient? Right? See, the thing about me is, when Obama overstepped his authority, right, when I thought the Supreme Court got Obamacare wrong, I was very vocal about it. I said, look, the Supreme Court is wrong, right? The federal government, if you read the text of the Constitution, does not have the right to directly tax you, right? Obamacare is a direct tax. That's why the income tax is illegal, right? So, anyway, I would speak out about it, right? But I wouldn't attack the man personally, right? I wouldn't, go into, ridiculous stuff, right? Like Trump did, talking about, he's not born here and all this nonsense, right? No, to me, that's just garbage, right? But I would point out, I wanted Obama to end the war in Iraq. I wanted him to do it. He did not do it, right? Then he became the drone president. And I would have real thoughtful debates with Democrat friends of mine. And I would say, and they'd say, well, that's not really war. And I said, well, if the bomb landed on your house and killed your family, right, you would think differently, right? Now, there were some Democrats that were very pissed off with Obama about it, because Obama was supposed to, put an end to all that. And he didn't, right? And there were a lot of people who were disappointed by Obama and what he did, right? But at least there were Democrats to call it out, right? There were at least, I know them personally, that would call out Obama, right? And say, hey, you didn't, do this. Or, hey, you're going too far here, right? My problem with now, it's really the MAGA faithful, right? We're seeing small portions of Republicans, very small, start to question things like due process, right? Like I heard Joe Rogan say something recently, very upset about due process, right? Not being followed, right? But there is a massive portion of the Republican Party that is beholden to Trump. And whether if he tramples on the Constitution, destroys the dollar, destroys your 401k, he's trampling all over your civil and personal liberties, you don't give a shit. That's the part that I don't understand. Like, what do you gain? What do you gain by not calling him out when he does something wrong? Like, that's the part that I don't understand. Like, you have to get out from underneath yourself, right? And think this through, right? Because you have a family, you have to live in this economy, right? You have assets, right? And they're being obliterated. And so are personal liberties, right? I don't find it funny. First of all, I don't speak MAGA, right? So a lot of times, like when I hear things like, when Trump says, oh, well, you know what, if you're an American and you commit a crime, we'll deport you too. I don't find that funny. There are some MAGA, oh, he's only joking. I say, that's a joke? After he's deported people who were allowed to be here, they have papers to be here, right? They did not hide, right? They're not part of a gang, right? 90% of the people who have been put in El Salvador never committed a crime. Not one crime, But, and you gotta read the 5th and 14th Amendment, because this is really important for people who oh, illegals don't have rights. They do, right? If I go into Canada, let's say I'm wanted by the government, and I run to Mexico, let's just say, because that's where a lot of people go. They go to Mexico, they go to Canada, right? They cross the border illegally. Americans do. If I get caught in Canada, right, or Mexico, and I did not tell them I was coming, I went there completely illegal, okay, I go in front of a judge before I get sent back here. I get arrested, I get sent in front of a judge, and I have a hearing in those countries, right? And we used to be the model for that, right? We were the model for Western civilization, right? To follow due process. And if you read the text of the 5th and 14th Amendments, it's very clear. It doesn't say just U.S. citizens. It actually says all people, okay? It says, shall not have their life, liberty, or property taken without due process, okay? That's everybody. Okay, this is like basic 101 constitutional stuff. Now, if you find somebody guilty, fine. My Democrat friends will be the first to say, deport them. If they're part of a gang, right, which you're claiming, or if they're part of something, fine. Go get rid of them, right? But if they're here on asylum, they're lawfully here, right? They've been in front of a judge, right? Now, there's this one case, and he's had other cases before. And so what I'll hear is, oh, well, he had a case a few years ago, and so he had his due process. Well, no, that's not how it works. Because every time the government makes a new charge, right, he gets to defend himself again, right? So if the government says, hey, you've committed tax fraud, right? But last year, I had a different type of violation, right? And I had that due process. I still get to defend myself for tax fraud, right? I can't just say, the government can't just say, well, you went to court last year on this other thing, so that's good enough. Another thing that I see being said on the internet is that, well, there's just too many people, right? We can't process, let's say, 13, 15 million people, right? It's impossible. Well, first off, we could process these people. We actually could, right? If Congress would get together and fund the courts the proper way, number one, right? But, number two, the amount of people, there is no, hey, this is too much, And once we hit this ceiling, then due process goes out the window. That's not how that works either. Like, there's a lot of people who file their taxes, like myself, that wish I didn't have to, right? I find it inconvenient. And that's the argument that I see now being made by the MAGA faithful, is that, we have all these illegals and now it's inconvenient, right? Well, so is filing my taxes. So is going to the DMV, right? So is following all the regulations, right? You think getting up in the morning and going to work is so convenient, right? To give 50% to the government? You think that's convenient? Of course not, right? But we do it anyway. You think when my ancestors and your ancestors fought in World War II, you think that was convenient? You think they were like, oh yeah, let's blow up half the planet? No, right? Sometimes you got to do what you don't want to do, right? But you do what's right, right? And so, yes, you got to read the text because it's very, very important. Yeah, so, look, so I'm going to give a tip for people who can't afford, let's say if you can't afford physical gold, because, now it's $3,400 an ounce. So, buy gold stocks. I'll give you two off the top of my head. The GDX and the GDXJ, okay? It's a very cheap way for you to buy the gold that's in the ground, right? These are solid companies. I own them, okay? And it's a way for people to invest in gold without having to spend $3,400 per ounce. And the brokers that I deal with, you have to buy 10 ounces at a time, right? So most people don't have $34,000 sitting in their back pocket. Now, in all fairness, I've been telling people for 20 years to do this back when gold was $300 an ounce. Back then you could have afforded it, but people were like, this will never happen, blah, blah, blah. And so now this stuff is coming into fruition, and now for a lot of people, they're locked out, right? They can't afford it. So my advice, I'm telling people, hey, don't buy the physical. Go buy the junior minor stocks and the major stocks in gold, where you can buy them for a few dollars, 30, 40, 50 bucks a share, and you can buy as many or as little shares as you want, and at least you're protecting some of your purchasing power. So either you're for the rule of law, which I thought MAGA was for. I thought that was the backbone of his whole thing, right? Now, don't forget, Trump, he got accused of a lot of stuff, right? He got to go to court, right? Now, you might say, well, it was unfair, was it a fair thing, blah, blah, blah. But he still had his day in court, right? He still got the chance to defend himself, right? No matter how innocent or guilty you thought that he was, right? He still had a chance. And why did he have that chance? Because of the Constitution, right? And now, the same opportunity that Trump was given, Trump is taken away from other individuals. And it's wrong. Now, granted, Trump did not cause the immigration problem. And look, I'm not saying Trump doesn't have decent intentions for fixing immigration, right? Because, again, we know we have to fix immigration. We understand that, right? I think everyone is on the same page on that. We might have different ways to get there, right? But the one way we cannot take is to violate the Constitution. And when Trump deports people without due process and then follows up by saying, if you're an American and you commit a crime, we'll deport you too. Okay? I don't find that funny. I don't find it funny. I don't think it's, anything I grew up with. It is completely foreign to me. And speaking of this, while everybody has their opinion on illegals and foreigners, right? So, doing a little research, okay? Now, I know this because, again, I've studied this stuff. You know, there's a reason why the founders put the Fifth Amendment in. And this is the part that MAGA doesn't understand, and I'm going to explain it right now. Do you know that 48 of the 56 signers, okay, of our founding documents, 48 were born here, the rest weren't? So according to Trump and that wing, the other 8 people that were foreign born should have even been founders. Those people fought in a revolution, right? They could have been hung by Britain, right? They gave us the greatest country on earth, right? And again, that's why the Fifth Amendment was written, and that's why the 14th Amendment later on was written to ratify the states. Because before, when it was the Fifth Amendment, the federal government couldn't violate your rights. Well, later on, they wanted to strengthen that and say, you know what, neither can the states, right? And so we have to think really hard about our past, right? We have to think really hard. Why would the founders do that? Well, because many of them were from other parts of the world, weren't born here, right? Look at the gift they've given us, right? Now, you know, so again, you know, the whole context is not being taught, right? Nobody talks about the 5th or the 14th Amendment when you watch Fox News, or when you watch Newsmax, or when you watch Tucker Carlson, or these other freaks, right? Because they're freaks, right? They lie, right? What they're doing is they are trying to show you, see, they're showing you certain cards. You know, and again, there are violent people who deserve to be kicked out. There are, right? Now, but what they've done is they've turned everybody now into this. And that's just not true. Now, if you want to change the laws, go through Congress. But the president is not a king, he's a president. And the judiciary, there's another thing that happened when I was gone. The judiciary, right, the judges, right, they're an equal co-branch, right? You have 3 branches. And the judges watch over the executive branch. That's how that works. So when I see posts going up there from friends of mine who, oh, how can a judge do that? Because that's their job, right? That's given to them by the Constitution. Why do you think the founders put that in the Constitution? To allow judges to have a check on the executive branch. They did that so a president can't overstep his power, right? See, this is how I see it. If you don't stand up for the weakest, then eventually they come for you, right? That's how I see it. Now, you might see it differently. Other people might see that differently. But that's the way I look at it, right? That if you're willing to cut the Constitution here and finagle with the Constitution there and decide to read something that's not there because it's convenient, right? Then you're willing to violate my rights, right? Because the Constitution is there to protect our rights from government stealing them, right? And prosecuting us and taking our land, right? And stealing our individual and economic freedoms, right? And so, yes, we should all fight back against that. We should ask for the rule of law at every... if that works for you, if it makes you feel better, you know, to blindly bootlick, go right ahead. That's not me. I don't bootlick Democrats or Republicans. I call it as it is. When I think Trump does something good, I say it. When I think he does something bad, I say it, right? And, you know, people take that. Look, at least I'm honest, right? When you watch Hannity or you watch these other shows, right? They're not honest with you, right? Let me give you for instance. I'm gonna give you a real example, right? So I drove through 500 miles worth of Texas, right, to go see my son. I drove through 500 miles of back roads. No, not interstate, back roads to get to my son, right? Now, it's funny because Republicans and Trump, oh, we don't like windmills, right? And he jokes about it all the time. And so the Republicans, they claim they're not for green energy. They claim they're not for wind or solar farms, right? Yet when I crossed through Texas, I seen hundreds, maybe thousands of windmills spread all throughout the state, right? Now, why did they take the welfare? If you don't believe in green welfare, why are Republicans taking all this green welfare? Aren't you against welfare? What happened, right? So you're going to deny the little kid his soda, right? But you're going to take billions in green welfare, right? How about this? I went through, like I said, 500 miles worth of Texas coming home, right? How about all the poverty I seen in Texas? How about all the poverty? I'm always told, oh, you go to Texas, it's, I might have seen for every 1 mile of prosperity in Texas, 50 miles of complete, poor and poor and poor towns and dead cities. Cities that are dead, okay, that I drove through. Okay, I could give everybody the route that I took, and they could take it themselves, right? But yet, when you watch Fox News, right, and you watch these channels, they tell you how great it is, right? Now, mind you, when you go to Dallas, right, when you go to certain places, right, yeah, the economy's a little stronger. Go outside. Go take a look outside and go see what you see, right? Because just as I was saying earlier, how I was tripping over homeless people in Las Vegas, right? Which is, kind of a purple state, right? I seen a lot of very poor and homeless people in Texas. Now, why is that? It's a red state, right? Should be prosperity all around, right? Why did DeSantis, I'll go one better, right? Because I've been to Collins Avenue in Miami. Let's go one better. How come DeSantis had to put in a bill with their legislation to arrest homeless people? If you don't have a homeless problem, what are you arresting them for, right? Because you have a lot of poverty down there, right? Just every state does. My state too, right? But when you watch the news, you think, oh, it's only New York. Oh, it's only Michigan. Oh, it's only California, right, that has a drug problem. Bullshit. There is drug problems. There is homelessness. There is poverty in red and blue states. And I don't want to, talk bad about somebody else's place where they live or their state. But if we're being objectively honest, okay, the politicians in both parties should be ashamed of themselves in what has happened here in the past 30, 40, 50 years. Okay, if we're being intellectually honest. See, the nice thing about not being a part of either party is that I don't have to lie for them. See, I don't have to pretend my president's doing a good job, right? I don't have to pretend to like a policy or defend doing the wrong thing. See, I don't have to do that, right? That's the I've been liberated, and trust me, I seen it in blue states, massive poverty as I went through. Let me talk about a blue city. Was Nashville. Nashville, Texas is a blue inside of a red state. And I'll tell you what, it was like lipstick on a pig. There was some new stuff and a lot of really old and broken down houses. And I gotta be honest, I was not impressed with Tennessee. It looked kind of backwards. I gotta be honest. It looked shitty, in my opinion. That's my opinion, right? Maybe you like Tennessee. I thought it looked like shit. That's my opinion. But again, that's a red state, right? Now, I seen it in blue and red. Florida, look at what they've done, right? Look at the price of housing. Look at the cost of living, right? Now, it is comparable to New York, right? See, if you're talking to somebody who hasn't been down there recently, maybe you can get away with saying, no, it's very cheap here. No, it's not, right? With somebody like me who travels, right, I can compare Miami to New York. I can compare, because I've been there. I can compare Miami to Los Angeles, right? You know, it's again, like I'm nonpartisan in this way. I view both parties as the problem. Okay, it's not just DeSantis. DeSantis is part of the problem, but so is Trump. So is the Federal Reserve. So is Congress, right? So, again, we have to be intellectually honest about why is our country failing, right? Why? Okay? And the way I see it, you know, both parties are bought out by their corporate masters, okay? They're bought out by Wall Street, the bankers, okay? They're bought out by Israel, right? They're bought out by the industrial complex, okay? So when I view this stuff, okay, I view it from an outside lens, right? I don't sit there waking up going, oh, thank God, you know, the Republicans are in or the Democrats are in. I could give a shit which side is it. Because, see, this is the thing. I understand that both parties are going to continue to do the wrong thing, which they have. You know, you said back when Trump was elected, things can't get worse. Well, they have gotten worse. If you own any assets, okay, if you own real estate, if you own stocks, if you own bonds, right, it has gotten worse. It's gotten a lot worse, right? You look at food prices, right? You look at what it costs to fix a car, right? What it costs to buy a car, right? I mean, debt is exploding throughout the country, right? So, no, things are getting worse. Now we're violating the Constitution, right? Even worse. Now listen, to be fair again, Biden tried violating the Constitution too, right? He didn't want to listen to the judges when he was trying to give college relief, right? Right, when he was forgiving debt, right? And I called that out, right? So again, if we're being intellectually honest, things are worse. And so, you know, look, so anyway, look, I'm going to, I think I went on pretty long. Let me see here. Just give me one moment. But anyway, I don't really care about parties. I really don't care about, I don't sit there and look at, if somebody's doing a good job, like Thomas Massey. Here's a guy I'd vote for. He's a Republican, right? Rand Paul. He's another guy that I like, right? So, there are people that I can identify with that will stand up for the Constitution, right? That will stand up for the right stuff. And so, yeah, those people I'll support. I mean, I admittedly gave campaign money to Thomas Massey. He earned it. He earned my support, right? Because I believe what Congress is doing is wrong, right? Anyway, look, I appreciate everyone for checking out Broom Media on YouTube. There's a brand new channel that explores economics and the day-to-day news and events. Look, I wanted to get on and talk about a bunch of stuff. Look, there are going to be people I'm going to be able to convince. There are going to be people that I'm not, and that's okay. I still respect everybody's opinion. I still respect everybody's point of view. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can at least have mutual respect for each other. Please hit the like button. Also subscribe. This will help me to be able to continue broadcasting and putting out good content. Now, this video, I got to edit it, and it will be probably up around Sunday. I know that seems kind of far away, but you know, I have a lot of work to catch up with, and all of this, and hopefully the next time I come on, I can talk about how the tariffs are affecting my business personally. My aluminum prices right now are through the roof. I got a bill today that was so fucking outrageous, I can't even believe it. But again, you know, I'm gonna have to pass on those savings to somebody else, hopefully, and that's the way the world works. So look, you want higher prices, you want less stuff, this is what we're gonna get. But I appreciate everybody. Thank you again. Thank you for your well wishes. Thank you for supporting me. My mission is to bring you a different perspective than you will find in the mainstream media, along with the best information possible. Look, I'm just one guy, but I have a lot to offer, stuff that you will not hear in other places, and I think that's really important. And look, if you're constantly being hit with the same information all the time, right, and you want to be part of the big group, that's not